Good evening.
Hello.
A big thank you from me to both of you for being here and choosing to have this conversation, to give this presentation and to continue the discussion that we started last month about the psychosis of existential training. Thank you also to everybody who is here with us today, and for everybody that's going to be watching it in the future, a massive welcome to you as well. I will start by giving a brief introduction to Sheba and Neresia for those who might not have come across themselves or their work before. And then I will hand it over to both of you. So, without further ado, Neresia is an MN CPS accredited, BACP registered therapist and a therapeutic coach, specializing in maternal health, birth trauma, multiple birth parenting, and supporting BIPOC families and carers of disabled and special needs children and young adults. She is a primary carer herself, as well as being a court-appointed deputy and case manager, collaborating with solicitors to manage financial and personal affairs, and a member of BABICM and the IRCM. She has a degree in psychology and counselling, and a postgraduate diploma in integrative counselling and coaching. She is also an ongoing DC Psych student in training and researching in counselling psychology and existential psychotherapy. Sheba is also a primary carer herself and has a background in public health, nutrition, and well-being, with extensive experience in social impact initiatives. She has worked with vulnerable adults and young people, designing and delivering projects that empower individuals and communities. Currently a doctoral researcher in existential psychotherapy, her research aims to explore creative mental health interventions within Latusu through the Ho-Hyang Initiative, a project that challenges current colonial frameworks by integrating creative healing practices and exploring a more pluriversal approach to well-being. Sheba's professional approach centers culturally appropriate methodologies that push to bridge gaps in equity and accessibility within healthcare. Her work aims to amplify voices that can go often unheard in physical and mental health discourse, treatment, and management. Now, at the end of Sheba's introduction, she was mentioning about amplifying voices, and of course, we wouldn't be here today if Sheba and Neresia hadn't found their own voices. And so, something that we'd been reflecting on between our last session and today's session was bringing up this question of why is it important to find your voice? How do you find your voice? And especially we were speaking about it in almost an embodied way, right? Like, what does that mean, and how has that experience been? And so maybe as a way to begin the conversation today, I can pose that question to you about finding our voice. What does that mean?
Wanna go, Sheba?
I'll let you go first today.
Okay, so finding our voices, what does that mean? And in terms of coming from an embodied way, it's around, your personal development. I think there's so many ways I could answer that in relation to how I embodied what I was feeling and what came up for me. I suppose one of the ways that came up was around holding space. How do I hold space, and how do I hold space for myself while I'm in training, not just as a therapist, but while I'm in training, what comes up? And lots of things came up, and it was around how was the space being held for me to be able to have particular experiences and feel safe enough to actually speak. The journey of my training has been mostly quite positive because I've had very responsive um, lecturers, but there have been some really quite traumatic times on the training where I didn't feel held and I didn't feel safe. And that showed up quite a lot, I would say, key points where I felt the training and my experience should have been at a pivotal point where intervention should have happened, and it didn't. And I think I carried that for such a long time, and it really impacted how I viewed not just myself, but how I viewed how I was turning up for others in my private work, and what therapy really was, or what existentialism really meant. And at that time there was a lot of reflection on, well, how do I do this? Like, what am I going to say? And I think on one occasion we had what's called like a personal development circle. And in that circle, sadly, I was singled out, let's use that word, singled out, and made, there was a lot of projections in that circle. There was a lot of underhandedness. But I was mindful from my undergrad studies that it was part of the journey. It was part of the journey in terms of the experiences. And how was I going to manage that? Was I going to embody? Was I going to internalize all of the unspoken projections against me in that circle? Was I going to become what it was that they were doing onto me? Or did I just have a chip on my shoulder? Was I the problem? And it took a very long time for me to find my voice. But at that point in that circle, I absolutely find my voice, because it was a personal journey. As much as it was an academic one, it was a personal journey. And I decided at that time that I needed to speak up and speak to what the problem was, because I knew that the problem wasn't me. So it was low, even though it was being directed at me. And it didn't end what had happened, but it certainly gave me enough space where I could hold myself, and create a circle around me where I felt that I was safe enough to continue. But it took a couple of months after that for me to really gather my thoughts. And at that time, I used my supervision, and I used my mentorship, and I used my personal therapy. So at that time, it was quite emotional, and I carried that, as a way, as a heavy reflection. There was a lot of heavy reflection during the point of my training.
And thank you for sharing. And I think I'll dip in and out of that occurrence that you're talking about, because we did have the pleasure of sharing that group together. For me, the embodiment started before the training, because again, I was trying to find representation, safety within my therapeutic experiences. So that being within my personal therapy, within the work that I was doing, I was always conscious and aware that I had a desire for representation, to see myself within the work, whether it be the work that I was receiving or the work that I was giving. I've always been very conscious of the nuance of understanding and trying to understand different people's backgrounds and where they're coming from, and how to best create a space where everybody can feel seen and heard. In terms of embodiment, now journeying into existentialism and existential training, one of the things that sold existentialism for me was the concept of freedom. So having that freedom, not having that boundary pathologization when it comes to is pathologization a word? I don't know, but it is now. But not strictly leaning on pathology, where you have the other modalities where you have to diagnose something in order to formulate and treat somebody. So that freedom to actually just explore one's existence really spoke to me. And my hopes were that it would allow for a more embodied approach, even though existentialism leans into philosophy and existential philosophy. But I did notice that, as I've always felt throughout my life, I was conscious of being Black in white space. I know we can look at the statistics of like the percentage of a Black person in the UK, but irrespective, I did feel the being Black in white space, not just because of the content, but also how the content could provide automatic privilege because of the theorists and philosophers that we were using. So that was something that I didn't just feel I held in my mind, but also in my body as well. I had shifted from, as you'd said, Natalie, being in the physical health sector, so looking at public health, nutrition, a stint in education as well. So I also had felt like I had imposter syndrome. But I remember early on when so within the first year, you have a process group where you talk about what you've been learning, what's coming up for you, and all those kind of things in terms of the theory. And I remember mentioning that, oh, I feel like I have a bit of imposter syndrome because everybody's coming from a therapeutic background, a psychological background. And I don't know if you remember, Neresia, but you were like, is it imposter syndrome though? And I did go back and forth with that because yes, it may have been imposter syndrome, but also I think not seeing myself in any way did contribute towards that. And then moving on to the incident that Neresia talked about, I think it was a way for whatever was going on internally in terms of like my felt sense, that was a way for me to realize that it wasn't just something I was feeling or something that was just in my mind, but there was something going on within the group dynamic. And I do remember after the conflict had arisen, Neresia had said that the way that we all approached it, all of us within that encounter could speak to our stance. And I'm not saying I'm quoting verbatim, but it could speak to our stance as future therapists and psychological professionals. And that helped me to, really think about what I was embodying, what I was holding, what I'd always held throughout my life in terms of not giving myself the license to speak, and the impact that that could have not only for myself, but also for other people as well. Because existential psychotherapy is a helping profession. So I'm going out into the world to help people. So it's really important that I understand what's going on for me, but I also understand I understand it logically, so with my thinking, but also understand what's going on in my body, because that may allow me the space to resonate with other people that can feel silenced. But it could also perpetuate silence if I were to just, say, okay, I feel this, it's quite uncomfortable, but let me just put my head down and get through, which is at one point what I thought I would do. But that ended up not being the case, thankfully. And I think Robert had said it in the last event, the call comes from within. And I really resonate with that. It's not always comfortable. Yeah, it's not always comfortable because sometimes, speaking up in a space where something you can actually feel the phenomena rising it can be really disorienting. It takes acts of bravery every time you do it. But when you feel, I think that's where the embodiment, the energy of what was going on helped to move through to voicing. And within the literature, even though it wasn't the literature presented within the training, I was able to find, existential, themes and topics that lent into this. And I think after our last event, I thought about Fanon and how he talks about the zone of non-being and, almost leaning, I think, let me just see if I can kind of, succinctly explain what I mean by that. So there's a quote in his book, Black Skins, White Mask, where he said, "At the risk of arousing the resentment of my coloured brothers, I will say that black is not a man. There is a zone of non-being, an extraordinary sterile and arid region, an utterly naked declivity where an authentic upheaval can be born." So it's not that we just kind of exist as, feeling dehumanized in certain structures, but from that can come that authentic upheaval. And we can, move forward into creating the recognition, moving within that context and creating that recognition so that we can now represent and see ourselves, not just because we want to have a better experience on training, but also for those that will come after us and for those that we'll work with out in the field as well.
And it's about that exhaustion. I think we were exhausted, but we weren't exhausted to the point where we felt we needed to remain silent. And I think in that particular lesson, that was how we found our voice, that how long we were going to be silent, how long were we going to allow this to continue, how long were we going to, become this object, and not be kind of, it wasn't just about respect, it was like even the context of how we presented in the lesson in regards to what we were contributing. It wasn't recognized. It was always put under. And that, again, thinking back therapeutically, if you're working for clients, how is that showing up? And we constantly did that. We constantly imagined that we were the client. So if we had a therapist that was presenting in this particular way, what's it doing to us as the client? And how did it work relationally? How was that going to happen? So there was a lot of internal work, a lot of personal development that we encountered into how we were carrying these baggages, really, of the projections that was happening. And in finding our voice, we began to read and we began to exercise not just academics, but exercise the power of knowledge and the power of understanding, and began to delve quite deeper into working existentially and looking at these existential themes and bringing in Black existentialism, which is a completely different layer.
And also, I think also respecting Black existentialism and Africana existential philosophy, not just for a Black person, but also as a legitimate approach across the board. Because, as mentioned before, it does come up in one term for 1 week, but I think it's important to understand the value of spreading it throughout so that we can start to imbibe and enjoy what it can offer to the wider existential world as well. So even for my case studies, my application, my choices are not just to look at how I can apply Africana existential themes or Black existentialism to my work with, for example, Black women, but also clients from other backgrounds as well, because that is how we legitimize these themes and theories and embody them and allow them to gain the notice that has been buried so far. Yeah.
I hope we've answered the question, Natalie, around embodiment. Does anyone want to contribute or ask anything?
That idea of a license was something that we thought was interesting, and who has been, as it were, issuing the licenses, and what it means to say, well, I'm kind of going to issue my own license now, and what that might do to, I guess, the system.
Lewis Gordon talks about licensing. I'm sure in Dr. he often talks about, I think he uses it in terms of privilege. And it has a different meaning. It encompasses something quite different when you say a license. And it kind of, gives the freedom to kind of take the power that you need, or the power that you deserve to do, to do what it is you need to do, rather than thinking the power lies elsewhere. And I think that's what we didn't do, Sheba and I. We didn't say, well, the power lies elsewhere in our academic journey or in our personal development. We have to become the very instrument that we need to kind of dismantle what we see there. So this is how we became very proactive and started to live exactly as we developed, rather than waiting for the training or the experiences to kind of give us. We had to go out and kind of indulge ourselves in what it is that we're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think Robert he had his hand up earlier. I don't know if you.
First of all, thank you for inviting me back into the conversation. I mean, you speak. I use these sessions to speak, and I don't know if it's going to land. I don't know if it's going to, but you said something that's landing hard to me. So even in philosophy, when you teach a general philosophy survey, or you even do 20th century, existentialism is this much of it, and it's usually towards the end. So this problem is compounded over and over and over again, and then I think is almost goes viral in most curricula that I have seen, whether it's in Germany or it's in Switzerland or it's the United States or the UK. So I just wanted to emphasize that this is not. I don't want you to feel alone. This is something like I said last time, I have experienced in theater, film, philosophy, psychology, and history. And history is a whole other problem. But I just wanted to share something because you inspired, I think, an insight into my own frustration over and over again of why aren't we starting with Fanon? Why aren't we starting with, in my case, it would be interdisciplinary work, but really doing it, not establishing a dominant culture first and then deconstructing it. I just like to start with the deconstruction. So I start with Bell Hooks. I start with Homi Bhabha. I start with, Stuart Hall. I don't start with, but I will go through the process of the historiographic, power sites in a field. But I think where we start really matters. So that was the first thought. And I would encourage everyone to, in your quote unquote licensing, as an expression of subjectivity, but also as an authorization of the state or private exchange, to start with that voice. And we keep coming back to this internal work. That is a wonderful way, Neresia and Sheba, to pull together what's in my mind many, many, many paragraphs. And I appreciate that because that internal work just pulls it all together. And this is what I wrote. Inside the silence, you seem to have discovered defiance and the will to express that defiance according to your decision, not as just an automatic response, not as a knee-jerk response, not as an involuntary response, but as a decision, a choice inside the moment that may have temporarily assumed or exerted control. And I think that's what a lot of people feel threatened by, is that it's easy to react. I'm reacting to you, right? It's harder to not going to react to you. And that's where this group starts to go, why aren't you, why aren't you? I was expecting to be pushed back. I was expecting to be in a tussle, but you are choosing to hold on to whatever that is, to figure it out, and then come back to it. But you're coming back to it. I don't know if you can tell I'm in theater. I do a lot of hand puppets. Sorry. But that's kind of what, the expectations here. But when you pull back, this person's has no idea what to do. This field has no idea what to do. And that's ultimately very empowering. And I've seen that happen a few times at conferences or in curriculum development. I mean, when I started the American history rewrite, I did a rewrite of a curriculum, and we started on Goa Island and slave auctions.
Oh, yeah.
And I got called into the president's office. So I won't tell you the whole story because I'd rather hear your story than my story. But just flipping the script on that, it was like, hold on, meeting adjourned. And I'm like, well, why? I mean, I'm supposed to start in Jamestown in Virginia, right? I'm supposed to start in Plymouth Rock. Well, what about New Orleans markets? What about Goa Islands? What about, I'm from Long Island. What about Sag Harbor, which was a slave site that many people even wrote about? So, I'm trying to emphasize and support the idea that these shifts for us are necessary, coming from our inner, internal work. But for others, it might be seismic. So what I'm encouraging as an existential philosopher, as a teacher myself, I'm really reflecting on those moments where I did not understand the size or the impact of the shift that I'm asking a student or a colleague to consider. And over time, maybe with age, I've learned to become a little more centered and a little more patient with that shock, which I experienced, and I think you all experienced too in the last session. There was a collective shock to what you both were saying that I really
Mm.
took a I found very, very interesting. And but I was also impressed by I was saying this to Natalie the other day. I was impressed by how both the person experiencing the shock and, quite honestly, the speakers who are provoking this shock were able to continue a conversation because I've seen it fall apart. I've seen it go. So I've seen people exit conversations, bloop, 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 they're gone. And I was just really impressed that you all seem to be practicing your therapeutic training in a way that told someone who's not a therapist, but is a teacher of 23 years, on how better to present, but also to reflect and react to extreme, sometimes extreme responses. And I'll be quiet. I just wanted to thank you for that because you took 5 paragraphs, put it into 2 words, and as a verbose person, I really appreciate that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing and to, you know, for reflecting that back to us, how you felt the last session was handled, because it is a seismic thing. And we know this. We know it's quite big. For others it's really welcoming, for others it's a shock, for others it's very like a knee jerk. But at the same time, I'm glad, and I feel really good for you to say that we're practicing, that you can see it. You can feel that we're trying to live what we're learning and how we're developing. Because what we realize, when we speak, some of these responses are traumatic responses. They're trauma responses. You see, prejudice, racism, it doesn't just affect people of color. It affects everyone else as well. Yeah. So we're very much aware of this, that a lot of this thing, it's from a very deep place, where there's no knowledge, there's no understanding, there's a lack of empathy, and there's so much things going on, and we're really attuned to that. So we choose not to have certain conversations because it goes against existentialism. It goes against it's devalues existentialism. It also is a betrayal as well of existentialism. So we do invite people in to try to have a relational conversations and for us to make meaning of what it is that we're trying to do. So it's like we try not to have too much distractions. We want to see people. We want to have a conversation, we want to speak. So we don't have a lot of slides. We're already on screen. We don't want too many barriers.
Mhm. And there is a lot that we hold in our bodies as well, because like you were saying, Neresia, it's traumatic. And Aisha Mavinga, I think she's recently released a new resource about the Black empathic approach, but she also talks a lot about recognition trauma and how when these themes sometimes come up, it can create a reaction in us as the ones that, might feel that we've been done unto, but also the ones that might have existed under the structures that perpetrated what had been done. And the work is to do, as Neresia said, sit here with it, not with the slides and the resources in the first instance, but really embody that discomfort and move through it collectively, it sounds really nice as we say it, but it can be hard work. It can be really hard work because, again, leaning into the theme of embodiment, it doesn't just show up in our exchanges, our verbal exchanges. It shows up in our relationality, how we're able to, contain ourselves within this space, in the different rooms that we find ourselves in, and the vulnerability as well. I think one person also that speaks really nicely about this, but also quite bluntly and has helped me in moving through some of that recognition trauma is Resmaa Menakem. He's got a book, My Grandmother's Hands, which is really, really helpful because it helps us identify where we are. And there's not really a blame because we're products of different legacies, but what we're trying to encourage is that we come together and we reason together, we relate together so that we can move out of this, because me and Neresia and whoever else could talk until the cows come home amongst ourselves. But then where does the change really happen? It happens in these combined spaces. It happens when we keep provoking the conversation. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Things might come up here. They might come up when we step away and reflect. But we continue to move through knowing that we're not doing it alone.
Anyone else want to have anything to say? Or ask even? I can see loads of people with their cameras off. Okay, Sheba, do you want to share the slide? The
Yeah.
next slide. So we're going to share a slide, and the first slide, we've decided to share a slide. And we are hoping again to bring another theme to this discussion, and we would like to get a little bit of interaction going amongst the group.
Can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the question here is, or the quote is, what would truly existential training look like where Eurocentricity was not centered and other knowledges, ways of being, knowing, experiencing was equally centered? A world of many centers. This again speaks to part of what Robert just said. Where do we start from? If we are to start from somewhere else, not Kierkegaard, not Heidegger, not Sartre, not that they're not valid, everyone's equally valid, but if that is not our starting point and we started from somewhere else, what would it look like to be an existentialist and to encounter the training? Does anyone have any comments on that?
I think also just to add, even if you're not an existentialist, as in training, like just how if you were to show up and think existentially, what would that look and feel like for you as well? I think Vanilla. Yeah.
Vanilla's raising her hands. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say really. Partly because I didn't see the first session, but the first thing that occurs to me in this particular session and this question is language, and just kind of, I think what I felt was relief if it wasn't Eurocentered, a sense that of being recognized as not being Eurocentric, but being different from the usual. I think that's where I'm going with that. So that would be a relief, but I would find it would be quite challenging in terms of language to see how this would be, the training would be conducted. I'm not an existentialist counselor. I wasn't trained in existentialist counseling or therapy. But I just sense that it sounds like a good idea. I'm just wondering how it would be introduced, how it would be conducted. I think it's a very good idea.
Why do you worry how it would be conducted or introduced?
I'm not worried in the sense of feeling defensive about it. I'm thinking of the practicalities because, and I think I'm thinking of the British, in being in a British context. Britain is not very good where languages are concerned and where its empire has been, and not acknowledge that where their empire has been is there's just a multiplicity of languages and so much that we don't know about. We don't know much about each other, who have been so colonized. Basically, we've been colonized in terms of thinking thinking in English, but not in the indigenous, our mother tongue. I think I would say. So it's from that angle I'm thinking. I'm wondering how could you teach? How could you teach? I don't know. How would you teach? Basically, I'll leave it at that. How would you teach?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that, Fenella. Between last session and today, that has come up a lot in conversation, in my own personal conversations around the area of language and also certain concepts. So I know you said your existentialism is not really your approach, but I think that all of us, show up existentially because it leans into our existence. So it might not be your modality, but I think the validity is there for you to say. So I can, no, I'll let you go for it.
No. I take the view that yes, we do know we exist, and we exist in different contexts and in different cultural developments and so on. But I'm trying. I think I'm kind of stuck in a way of how do we get that? How do we get that across to one another? How do we how do we get that? How do we get that? There are just so many different things. So there's the power dynamics going on in there in terms of the ways in which we were colonized and the ways in which we were scripted to look at ourselves and others. So there's that. I think what I'm saying, there's so many barriers. There's so many hurdles to kind of grapple with. I think it's not dismissing, is it? I'm not wanting to be dismissive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I mean, it's fascinating on one level. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with you because it's in some of our written work, we call it epistemological violence because epistemology and knowledge and ways of knowing are coming from, like you said, sometimes the colonial mindset and frameworks. And on top of that, the way that we knew things wasn't just ignored or sidelined. In many instances, it was removed. So there is that interruption. Maybe I could call it epistemological interruption of our existence. But when you were saying that, you reminded me also of a paper that I'd read, and I think we'll probably put it in some of the work that we publish, but at the end, the author says that it's the work of removing magic. So removing that magic, that hold that was over us, and just a call for us to, again, as we'd spoken about before, start that work within in these contexts and see how we move through. And I definitely agree with you. Do we know how that would look like? Do we know what that would look like? It's a long work, and maybe we won't even see the what we would hope for in our lifetimes. But just by way of having conversations like this, it does lean into that removal of that magic, that removal of that standing in one place and saying that, okay, this way is the standard.
I'm thinking about something that Robert said about deconstruction and stuff, and I'm finding that problematic. I think that deconstruction needs to go on, because it's, for me, that is about removing that that layer, if you like, of a colonial mindset. But I'm also thinking too about how can, because I'm talking personally, being brought up in as a colonized person, not knowing what was there before, through slavery and so on. How I don't know, as an individual going through this, it would, I wouldn't be completely free of whatever it is that was actually in that I'd imbibe throughout my life growing up. Does that make sense? It's I think what I'm saying, I don't think there is I don't think there can be a clean slate. So what then do you do? What then, you can, I can, I do my family history. I can do, the language that's in the Caribbean to a certain degree. But it's already being, I'm using the framework, I'm doing the mind, the words and so on, is still how I'm looking at it has already been, it's already there. I don't know. It's just very difficult. It's just very, very difficult.
I think existentially sometimes we can think of healing, and I'm gonna just when you say deconstructing, healing is not a place.
It's not
a place.
No.
Yeah, it's a journey. So when if we're to look at where how we're going to do this, it's one step at a time. There is no certainty, and it may not look the same for everyone at the same time. And
that's true.
The power, and that's the power behind the philosophy of existentialism. And that's the power behind the concept of deconstructing. So I think in a typical fashion, when these words are used, what typically comes to mind, let's pull these statues down, let's do this. But it's actually what we're talking about is a shift. It's a paradigm shift, an internal paradigm shift. And if everyone's able to do that or get to a place through philosophy, through existential therapy, then they're without hopelessness. And I think at the moment there's a lot of hopelessness that exists because we get consumed. Well, where do we start? We start with ourselves.
That's absolutely true. I'm thinking about, perhaps what Sheba said earlier about this kind of space, this non-being space. For me, that that is appealing. it's a, you know, because it's a sense that I could put myself in that space, that and that's how I'm reading it. Yeah. So yeah. So Neresia, yes, you're right. There is uncertainty, and quite right. For me, that's okay. That's absolutely fine, because I wouldn't. If there was a certainty and absoluteness, then I would be worried.
Would you mind if I added a comment about deconstructionism? Because I want to make sure I was heard.
Yeah.
There's no erasure in deconstruction. That's one of the myths about the legacy of 2.5, maybe 3 generations. So, and it's one of the harder offshoots of the existential push into deconstruction phenomenology, is that what we encountered was just a pretty aggressive either or. Oh, so it's going to be either we, you know, ignore what the statue represents, or we destroy the statue, versus another approach, which is, why don't we just stand and talk about that statue that's been sitting here for 70 years? And ultimately, someone might want to pull it down. And you know what? I'm not, you know, that's what someone else chose to do. I'm choosing to hold as hard, you know, almost hold back as much you can, you know, of these violence, quite honestly, and counter violence. And but one of the things that I try to remember, and I need to remind myself often when I'm writing or thinking, is that you know, there's no erasure in deconstruction. And in fact, the best way to think about why I enjoyed the old school ways of teaching with chalk and a chalkboard is, you can, you know, I can write a word, you know, and then I can put my hand across it, and there's the words. I mean, it's not really the word, but you know, we have an echo, or we have, you know, sort of a mirage of the word, and then now we're dealing with the thing that was, the thing that is, and the thing that could be or will be. And so when it came to the curriculum suggestion that I was offering earlier, I wanted to acknowledge 2 things. One, that the internal struggle is an essential part of the curriculum development, so whatever field you're in. But the pushback is real. The pushback is intense. In fact, I left higher ed because of the pushback. I'm now back in it, but I had to walk because after 12, 15 years of fighting what felt like the same battle over and over again, I am a wildly mixed blood guy from Long Island. So I don't really fit many categories, but I would be skewed one way or skewed the other way. But I was always constructed as the rabble rouser, because I'm trying to the reason why I'm trying to change things is because I personally have gotten so much. I've been the gift of the curriculum that I was introduced to, whether it was at Dartmouth or at Minnesota or in Europe or wherever, were from practicing sociologists, practicing African, Nigerian, Congolese. I mean, my God, these and 2 Barbados scholars from Barbados that were in my life, and I received something, and that changed how I think about myself, my family, my curriculum. And so I'm always trying to just sort of bring that back to, and the resistance was absolutely intense, in some ways provoking actual rage. I mean, actual people coming at me, like for real. And that's just me saying. I can't even imagine what it'd be like, you know, if I wasn't me. You know, I'm trying to just get to the idea that we often forget that, or maybe we have to forget that what we're offering might seem like a simple shift, but creating many centers when you have been the center for millennia. What's going to be the response? And the response is going to be, you know, what are you talking about? You know, so almost like the 5 stages of grief. You know, it's like, what are you talking about? I can't be that, and I'm, you know, go through the whole stages. And so I just want to emphasize always that I don't quite know the answer to the way you start, but, and I don't claim to be right on that, but holding other knowledges in that center and the many worlds in the center is completely new for many, many, many people in our fields and in our lives. And the last thing I'm going to say is, and I'll conclude, is the part that talk about deconstruction. One of my colleges like to leave out parts of the Plato's cave analogy, and they left out the part where in Plato's cave analogy, the prisoner escapes, sees the light for himself for the first time, and comes back and tries to liberate the rest of the prisoners in the cave. And that's not the end. The next part is where the prisoners try to kill him because he has changed. And so that moment really stood with me when I was doing curriculum work, especially trying to bring in new voices, because the reaction was almost always, I want to hold on to this thing so desperately and so hard, and so intensely. And so it's even in philosophy, they are not telling the whole story. And this happened over and over again. It was so one college, then it goes to Texas. Texas then spreads the curriculum, and now that section of the cave analogy is kind of erased. And I always found that to be the most insightful and scary section, where hey, I want to share this new thing with you all. Why are you raising fists at me? So I wanted to offer that back. And Fenella, it's really nice to meet you, and I really appreciate what you had to say.
Thank you, Robert. I think Chris Akabusi wants to say something.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to make a contribution. So, yeah, it's my pleasure to be on the second iteration of this presentation. I just want to start off with saying that it's very difficult to talk in as much as when I was on the first one, I did find it quite violent, some of the interactions. Now, it might say a lot more about me than what was going on, but I did find it quite violent, in particular when Dr. Not Mackenzie's, his reaction, but Langley said his piece about how shocked he was, and then it just kicked off about basically, so you should be shocked, so what about that? And so when I come to this statement that we've got down here, a world of many centers, I'm thinking that for me, the existential point of view, and I have done my training only at master's level, the existential point of view is that we all just chucked into this world. None of us asked to be here. And we get thrown into the world, into a context, and we find a way in this world. And one of the readers that I really loved, I still love, is a guy called Nietzsche. And his idea that a will to truth is a will to power. And when I see all the dynamic and the shouting from the last time, and I can really see this power play, this real desire to have a truth, or have a way of seeing the world. When in my time on this earth, and it's going to be my birthday tomorrow, by the way. I'm 67 tomorrow. So I've gone around the sun a few times, and I look at both you, Sheba, and Neresia, and you've got a voice. I mean, you're not shrinking violets. You've got a voice, and if the world of many centers is not an oxymoron, I mean, the idea of many centers is unfathomable to me. But if it's not an oxymoron, then the existential way of life has done its job for me. That you two young ladies, and I have no idea how old you are, but my surmisation is that you're younger than I am, have got this very powerful voice, and not scared of using your platform, and are certainly are prepared to agitate in the gestalt, the framework that you find yourself in. This image of this young lady here with tears in her eyes and pins in her face is unable to, well, my interpretation there's a lot going on inside her that she's unable to say. And in this very brief experience I've had of both you two young ladies, I'm not trying to be rude, young people, young ladies, whatever, you're able to say, I mean, I've heard your voice, and the challenge I went away last time, and it made me move away from the canon that I've seen. You know, like for me, Nietzsche is a favorite, but Kierkegaard, as you've already said, and Sartre. And then maybe look at Fanon, and you talked about the wretched of the earth, and all of a sudden reading some of that work there, not saying that I've not seen Gordon and Black existentialism. I'm not quite sure I like that prefix, but there you go. It's just existentialism. It's just 7 billion people chucked into the world in a context, in a zeitgeist, trying to understand themselves, if there is a them, a me, an I, a we, but trying to make sense of our ways as we make a world, and having these little power plays. And in the end, not seen as part of the existential canon. But another one of my authors that I like is a guy called Voltaire. And when he writes about Candide, who's leaving his castle, looking for the best of all possible worlds, he's had a fine, wonderful upbringing with nannies and playthings, and he's very idealistic about the world he's about to enter. And he goes on his sojourn and his journey, and he meets war, pestilence, anger, disagreement. His buttocks are cut off, and comes back bedraggled, having had his existential wander through the world. And he realizes with this statement, well, all I can do is to tend my garden. It's just tend my garden. And we all have a worldview, and I live in the UK, and you see the budgets and all the things and the macro stuff, and in the end, to tend my garden, to be using this word, a centre that might shout in the wilderness, might have a few people like Nietzsche who he speaks to in a marketplace and they don't know what he's talking about. But that's it for me. Is that the existential is the existential for me is it's a freeing philosophy. My biography is my philosophy. And yes, as Fenella was saying, I can't help the fact that I was born, bred and buttered in 1958 in the United Kingdom, where the context of we won the war in 1944, and Britain felt that it was great, and it was coming off the back of this colonial journey, and then all the desperate countries released themselves from colonialism. But it's in my mind, my language, the very language that I'm speaking, is going to hem in, it's going to put me in a framework. It's difficult to have these other voices. It's for each and every voice, for me, to make their way in the world and to tend their garden. For those people that come into your being, into your circumference. I mean, I'm going to stop there because I can see that I'm beginning to my anger. But it's that, and it was I'm fearful to talk because last time when a few people were talking, for me, got battered. Now it's my tenderness, I've got a big mouth, but I'm a lot more tender. And my tenderness, I thought, wow, the doctor was going, I'm shocked. Really, you haven't got a voice. I'm shocked. Got battered. That's my experience. Battered. I don't want to get battered. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. And I'm really happy that you had the courage to share that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can't speak for my colleague, like what, but I'll go back to what you said, you're very tender. I think we're all very tender. We just have different tender spots. And for some of us, the experience has not been the one that you described. And some of those journeys have been very colored. So in becoming the doctor, go ahead.
I think,
Did you?
you know, so yeah, I was going to say, but that's my point precisely, is that there was the existential reality, there was as many journeys as there are people.
But what I think what you were pertaining to in that, in the first one,
Which one?
and if the first existential platform that we did last
Okay.
month, yeah. If I can recall, and this is just a summary, if I can recall, I believe what was being alluded to was whose humanity counts. You know, there's a lot of dehumanization that happens through existentialism because everyone thinks as an existentialist that we're all the same, but we're not all the same. And that speaks to Black existentialism because there is an erasure, there is an epistemological erasure of what is existentialism. In an ideal world, we will just be existentialists. But the reality is, you will hear about so many existentialists or so many contributors of the philosophy and the theory, and there's an active denial of other lived realities with their own philosophies. So the fact that, you know, Fanon would even argue, why not Black? Why can't we say Black? What does it mean? What comes up for you in your body? You know, he talks about epidermalization. What is he saying? You know, when we say Black, and let's just look at Black for the word Black. When we say that, what comes up in you, Chris? What's problematic around it being Black and existential? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you say what comes up for me, nothing.
Yeah.
When you say what comes up for me,
Yeah, because you said, you know, that's a bit like, why can't it just be existential? And I agree, but I'm saying to you, we've had our journey, Sheba, and I'm like, why is this Black existentialism? Why is it not existential? Why is it not part of existentialism? Why is the coining Black? So I'm just asking, I mean, you don't have to share. I mean, it's just something that's come up. Like, what comes up? Like, what for you is what's the irk? What's that irk that you feel when the terminology is Black?
Well, it depends on the context. I think that for me last week it seemed very violent. I mean, I've got Black Existentialism, a book up in my library. I've got it there. When I pick up that book, there's no violence in that book. When I'm reading the book, I think
So you're saying the responses, or the scene very violent, or
yeah, I think, and again, Dr. Derek Mackenzie's not here, but I think that it got very aggressive. It got for me, and again, this is just me. So I just think that I think it was Dr. Langley. Dr. Langley, having listened to what was said that I'm shocked, and he was shocked. What my reception was, that he was shocked that the training that you were going through in an existential point of view was so polarized, and you didn't feel that. Well, let me not put words into it. But then what the vitriol that came back, my language, vitriol is probably too tough a word, but I've used it. And it's just me. I thought so much so that, I ain't going to say anything. So, okay, in this one, I ventured to say something. I ventured to say something. And my sense is, yeah, I don't use personal, I'm a Black man. Because that's how I was brought up into it. I feel that I'm a Black man, and yet when I say I'm a Black man, I know that I'm not saying that I am a Jamaican or Grenadian or Black British. I'm a Black. I am British. And my parents come from Nigeria, and I was immersed in 1958 in a world where United Kingdom had just won the war. They hadn't. You know, I understand that, you know, many of the Commonwealth countries contributed. But what I'm trying to say is, when I was in the playground,
Yeah.
my formative years, we used to sing songs. We won the war in 1944, and everybody felt great about themselves. Right. So I am just one person
Yeah.
in my center who's lived an existential journey. I'm trying to make the mess of it, and I'm not as I look at you two young ladies, and I'm really proud that you're got much more fortitude, and you get yourself that's again, I'm just taking it from what I met. I'm not necessarily like that, although I might have much more quiet discussion on the golf course. Built, oh yeah, and my golf course, it's woven. It's a lovely highfalutin golf course. I might have much more. I might have a discussion on the golf course, knowing that in 10, 15, 20 years time, I'll shuffle off the mortal coil. I've left whatever it is here, and in 100 years time, no one knows who you are anyway. That's it. You chucked it in the world, you get ripped out of the world, and you get this opportunity, like a Candide, to go into this very violent, aggressive, interesting, engaging world with its power plays, and you take your bits and bobs and you tend your garden. My garden's Woburn Golf Club. My garden's my family. They're going to come here at Christmas. And actually, this ability to share a little bit, and you accept it. Doesn't matter. I've just shared a little bit, dropped a little bit in there. You guys go away, and then once everybody goes away, and I make what do you make of it? None of my business. You go and your own little world of centers. And I shut up again. It starts here, and I zip it up there. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing that. We've got 3 comments, unless anyone wants to make a comment after Chris's. We've got 3 comments in the chat. Sheba, do you want to read that out?
Yep, so I can start with Sheila's, just to also say thank you, Chris, for everything that you shared. And although you talk about tending to your garden, I feel that you sharing your perspective and voice, all voices and perspectives are valid, but that is part of the contribution. Like you say, in 20, 30, 100 years, we all journey on, but this is part of that exposure and that representation as well. So thank you. Okay, so Sheila has said, I'm a therapy student in the States and I am very new and just learning, but I'm seeing a connection here. It seems to me existentialism is about naming what's actually there, which is in alignment with deconstructionism, in that it's not erasing history, but being honest about, and also in alignment with this idea of healing not being a place, but rather a process. Existentialistic psychotherapy seems to put the emphasis on process and naming what we see in our reality. But what Fenella was saying brought up for me, it does feel so daunting. And I feel this in my PWI institution, as the curriculum has to fit into these inherently white supremacist structures, even just in that there is limited time and emphasis on product over process. Also, I'm cooking for the holiday, so apologies for not being on the camera so much. That's fine, Sheila. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I think does anybody have anything that they want to share with regards to that? Because I think there's a lot of powerful reflections within there.
Significantly passionate for me is the idea about not erasing history and being honest about the history. And in a recent conversation, the 3 of us shared, and I have it here, we were wondering how did this happen? How was so much erased from history? Because it's the point I think many of us are saying is that these voices from all around the world, and obviously that's a big part of what the Global Existential Summits are showing, is all around the world throughout history, there have been so many incredible contributions exploring what does it mean to exist. And yet, as you as this slide is saying, is a big part of what you're contributing, is saying, and yet in today and for many, many years since the development of existential training schools, most of these voices have been left outside of the conversation. And so that, from Sheila's comment, is what stands most out to me. The idea about not erasing history, but being honest about history.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. And it's just reminding me of an example I gave in the last event about how I could bring in existentialism in terms of looking at Sartre's influence on Black existentialism rather than other angles that it could be brought into the presentation, like the options that I was giving. Because also we know that, you know, Sartre and Fanon had a relationship and you know, they were peers. We know, but we also know that Fanon had a rapport with Césaire and other people. So it's just about um how we're brought in as well. I think that's where I'm challenged because I definitely do agree with you, Chris, also, and I love Kierkegaard, enjoy Nietzsche and all these other people, but I always felt like I was reading them, but I also couldn't find myself completely within them. There were other things that I was seeking for, and I had to go out and do the work. And for those of us that, you know, engage in the formal academic structure when we study things, it's not free, not just financially. It takes something from your spirit, your mind, and your body. So I was on that pursuit to really find that representation, and it would just be very meaningful to have that representation within the canon, so I don't have to go out and spend more money looking for it, spend more energy looking for it, etc. And then thinking about it in practice as well, sometimes, you know, when we have that understanding of how some of us may feel that we show up in the world, that can not just inform a Black existential practitioner, but also an existential practitioner from anywhere in the world on what our ontological experience is. So even when, like, I read R.D. Laing, and that's where I got familiarized with ontological insecurity and that state of destabilization that we can be in. But I didn't just resonate with it as one experience at certain points in my life. I felt like I existed in ontological insecurity continuously. So then what do we do? How can I bring in other theory that can help me to understand that, yes, this is not just a phenomenon that's rising for me, but it's also something that historically has risen up for other people, and what has been done about it, what has been said about it. When I started finding the Gordons, the Fanons, the other Hooks, Lord, people that we don't even, you know, class as existentialists, I was able to realize that, oh, this is not something new, and I can build. So I'm not starting, like you were saying, Chris, we do have a voice. We're standing on someone's shoulders. This is not like elementary work. There's foundations that have been dug. So it's about how do we put those into the curriculum as well, so that we're richly resourced within academia, within, you know, just the presentation, whether it could be academia, it could just be in our interest. If there's an existential section within a bookshop or, you know, resource, do we see all of ourselves there? And that's it might sound idealistic, but I think that would be fantastic.
It's not idealistic at all. I'm reminded of a paper that I'm actually still working on the paper. And just to bring in a little bit of psychology, and if we look at the DSM and we look at the criteria for MDD around depression, and we look at the comorbidity between, say, depression and the criteria for fibromyalgia, they're the same. And in terms of pathologization, there's a lot of Black women, there's a higher number of Black women suffering because they do not get the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. They get it, if they should get diagnosed, they'll more likely get non-diagnosis. So they're left to suffer. And in the NHS at the moment, it takes up to 2 years to get a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. And we have an incredible amount of Black women that's floating around the system in pain because the criteria for diagnosing fibromyalgia or depression says that you should not have another medical condition. You can only get diagnosed for fibromyalgia. Now, through existential work, we're beginning to reframe how pain is interpreted. Yep, so through a Black existential lens, because through the current lens that's often used, not just in existentialism, it is through a pathology. It's a pathologization of Black skin. It's through a genic and historical factors of who pain counts. And we see this being repeated in Black maternal health care, where Black women are more likely to die. And that's another, platform that will discuss that. So we see this framing happen all the time. And in terms of existentialism, being, every man's journey, it is, but there's also a historical concepts that we can't ignore. And we cannot just be therapizing people, working with people without an historical context behind them, regardless of what that context is. And for us, our power is in ourselves and through ourselves. And that's why we use ourselves, because there's such a huge gap in terms of using existentialism and the power of therapeutic work to help and support people in their journeys. So it's not just, we're all the same. It's more about justice, because we can never be equal and the slate will never be clean, and we're not asking for that. But what we are saying through our work is it's about restorative justice, especially for me when it comes to Black maternal health. It's about restorative justice. But we'll talk about it time.
Yeah, Neresia, I'm really glad that you brought up the issue of Black women, because, and not just Black women, but women.
Women, period, yeah.
Period, because one of the things that there seems to be an omission, really, of how do we as women start to theorize existentialism in relation to our experiences.
Yeah.
And of course, totally agree with you about the medicalization of Black women and depression and so on. So yeah, it is problematic.
And the history behind, as you said, Black women and being in the medical world, what happened to our bodies? Our bodies became the site of the oppression. They practiced, gynecologically on Black women's bodies.
Oh, yes, yes.
There's a huge issue within our NHS, our British UK NHS, around who feels pain and who doesn't. And they'll say, and I'll bring myself into it, I was actually told that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you,
There is this I don't know what to call it, but view that Black women don't feel pain.
We don't feel pain, yeah. Or our pain thresholds are higher.
Yeah.
So there's a huge work going on at the moment in the NHS, in maternal health care, to retrain NHS maternal health workers around how to work with women of color, because there is a historical injustice through how people are trained and how to deal with, and in this context, Black women.
Injustice and ignorance.
Yeah. It's costing the death of Black children. These are facts. You can write to the Freedom of Information and get this, the high number of deaths. And I thought it was important to bring this in, Chris, to understand what's going on here in terms of the philosophy and existentialism and the idea that we're all free, and how we're going to approach this. We're all on our journey, absolutely. But there's the social conditioning where some of us are more akin to have particular experiences because of the experiences. So you're more likely to have an adverse outcome in maternal health because you've had an adverse childhood. So if something adverse happens, you're less likely to be able to cope with it. And these are facts. These are the things that's coming out through the studies. So then, as existential therapists, we can't work without that historical context and be able to support clients.
So yeah, again, that is just nicely fed into what we wanted to talk, another theme that we wanted to bring up, which is the lived realities in practice. And it really just feeds into what of yourself, Vanilla, and Neresia were talking about in terms of considering the structural inequalities when it comes to existential themes. So yes, when we look at existentialism, we look at freedom, we look at meaning, but can we really explore those things adequately if we're not understanding the systemic and historical injustices that have taken place? So I think when thinking about this, we put the quote from Simone de Beauvoir that says, "To will oneself free is also to will others free." And the question that we're posing when thinking about this is, how would existential themes shift if we centered injustice? So whether that be in the therapeutic encounter or in any kind of existentially themed conversation that we were having, if we were to center those, even the injustices that we've been talking about just now in terms of the healthcare system, socioeconomic conditions that certain groups might be subject to, and how that feeds into their adverse experiences in early childhood and their adult outcomes. How do those themes start to feed in, and how can we make space for them existentially?
Should we talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, go for it. So if I were to ask you, Neresia, how would existential themes shift if we centered injustice?
Well, I think everything would shift in
Mm.
terms of majority of the theories when it comes to the Black experience. And I use the term to talk about the Black diaspora as a whole, as colonized people, as enslaved people. I think in terms of how we view humanity would shift. Therefore, if we viewed ourselves as humans, and not just Black people and just in our skin, the whole paradigm of how we think about ourselves, some things will be not just muted, it wouldn't exist, would it?
Mm. Mm.
I
Yeah.
really want to encourage everyone to join in and to think about this a lot. I don't want to be
Mm.
filling up the space for you. I really implore people to get involved. I mean, look at what de Beauvoir says. To will oneself free is also to will others free. So in your own freedom, what would you expect from other people? If you're willing yourself freedom, what would freedom look like for other people? Or is your freedom dependent on someone else's lack of freedom?
I don't want to pull it away from that point, but I'm just thinking because I have written in the past on, for example, the concept of absurdity and how we explore that existentially. But then I went on to add the intersection of Afro-pessimism. So when we look at absurdity, it can existentially help us to realize that, like Chris, you mentioned earlier, we are thrown, and then we have to, work our way through life. No matter what context we're born in, we experience that thrownness. We're thrown into this world. We didn't choose to be born, and life can be pretty absurd. You gave some examples about living in the UK, the cost of living, etc. So there is that level of absurdity that we experience in the day to day. I think when we look at absurdity and existentialism, sometimes we refer to Camus' myth of Sisyphus, where Sisyphus was sentenced to roll the stone up the hill, and then every time he gets to the top, it rolls back down. And then he goes again and again. And the way he's able to deal with that absurd reality of him being sentenced for the rest of his life to roll the boulder up the hill, is imagining himself happy. So accepting that, okay, this is what I have to do. It's a lot more complex than that, summarizing. But then if we think about that and the fact that we all have to show up like that, what are the systemic injustices that, make that absurdity or nihilism, an automatic for some people rather than a choice? And I say that because I was at a conference and there was someone that said, I don't really believe in hope. Like, I feel like it's overrated. And for me, I was like, if I didn't have hope, I don't think I'd be able to see the next day. I wouldn't even exist probably because my ancestors had to believe in hope. They had to live by hope in order to exist under certain structures of absurdity. So if we kind of layer down to understand sometimes where there have been those systemic injustices and how that might, how do we explore that so that when we're looking at certain existential concepts, we can pull ourselves up equitably by having, I don't know if it's language or opening ourselves up to what others' experiences of injustice are and how that impacts how they experience and move through the world. Not to point fingers, but also just to maybe examine what are all of our different freedom, what freedom looks like in all of our different contexts. I'm going to stop share because it will just, so that we can all see each other. Yeah.
Those on screen, I can see you're really thinking. Chris, I can see you're really thinking.
I think Chris put here living in the matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah, the concept, I'm thinking, this whole idea of freedom, and again, freedom is limited in my perspective, which is why I talk about the garden, because the idea, my parents come from Nigeria, and the amount of freedom in Nigeria is completely different to the freedom over the United Kingdom. And what I can and what I can't do. I mean, I'm speaking here now for 2 hours, listening to you speaking, and no one's taking my light, no one's taking the power. I'm not going rushing out far to put my generator on and then find. It's just this concept of freedom that there are so many restrictions on freedom at different levels in different theatres. And personally speaking, with my Weltanschauung, my worldview, socially and politically, we are, again, Nietzsche says, the human being is a domesticated animal. We're domesticated. So yes, I mean, I will freedom for everybody, but for me, freedom is limited. It's limited to my Umwelt, the world that I'm in my here and now. And if I live in a world of kind people, I can trust my daughters to walk around and be safe. If I'm living in a world where there's aggressive people, I've got to get my meat and cleaver and I've got to fight people. But my freedom is limited dependent upon my context. So I will freedom, and I feel a sense of freedom in one way here in the United Kingdom. But it's different from the freedom that I do feel in Nigeria. I don't go to Nigeria as much as I used to. We used to go for a year, where, funnily enough, there's freedom as a man. I'm a black man. I'm not seen as aggressive, just because I'm moving my arms around. So I've got that sort of freedom. But then it's limited to the things that I can do, because even by the way I walk, they say, JJC, Johnny, just come. This is, but this is a white guy. So, I'm not free to take part in the interest and make decisions as I am here in the UK. So, freedom, I'll just say freedom is limited. It's always limited. It's always restricted depending upon your Umwelt and your Mitwelt, which are basic, and Umwelt, for those who are not in the essential world, is your surroundings, and your Mitwelt is the people that you are with. These are limiting factors to how you move, breathe, and have your being in the world. And again, I've said enough.
Yeah. Lewis Gordon will argue by the very notion of using Umwelt and, all of those European things to contextualize our relationality is the problem, because existence happens for other people outside of that. And this is what decolonization and deconstructing is about, because existence lives, in other dimensions and not just in the Euro-centered notion of freedom.
Yeah, but Neresia, but my point is what I mean, Fenella talked about language. Whatever language you are using, if I go around the corner and there are a bunch of people there, whether you want to use the word Mitwelt or Umwelt, I don't care what you use. When I go around the corner, immediately I present to those people something to deal with. Am I friendly? Am I aggressive? What am I? What am I? I don't know. I don't know how you see me. But immediately I come around the corner. Now, the word I've used in a professional sense is Umwelt Mitwelt. But yeah, so that's it. So I don't need to get bogged down in this again, this decolonization business. It's just that when I show up in Nigeria, I can be dressed up in all of my wrapper and everything. They go, white man. I don't need to say a thing. Just the way I come around the corner, Oyibo, Uncle Becky. Yeah? Or if I'm here in the UK and I come around the corner and I'm like that, or aggressive black man. I don't need to. I'm just sorry. I'm just gesticulating, and it looks aggressive.
I appreciate everything you're saying, but we're saying the same things, but we're coming from different places. So I'm agreeing that freedom is different for different people because of the context from which they're coming from. What I'm saying is in terms of even the language used, that poses a limitation, because some people, even when we enter the room, it's not just us entering into the room. We're not the person entering into the room. So another person's worldview, what we're trying to do through existentialism and say this platform is to get people to understand sometimes even the concept of entering into the room, it's not just Neresia entering into the room. Some cultures don't even use I am entering into the room. They're coming in with everyone else before them. They're not even coming in as me. They're coming in as the embodied emotion of what lineage that they're coming from. So in terms of language and meaning, you and I, being academics, we know the Umwelt and we understand and it's vigorous and we get it and it's beautiful. I love it. But the other perspective that we also need to hold is that where other people are not coming in with that, they're not coming in with themselves.
And again, I think I had a challenge with Sartre and his concepts of individualism, because not that I feel that I'd go to the opposite and lean into collectivism or just communal ways of being completely, because that also has its challenges. But when we look at individualism and freedom, I was like, okay, but it really wasn't landing for me, because that's not how I exist. That's not how I've been raised. And therapeutically, sometimes when we even landscape with a client or try and figure out what's going on for them, we can bypass the different dimensions that people are coming from. So all their different domains. But then also we can view the domains, because we have the spiritual, the personal, the social, etc. But through which lens are we looking at that as well? So I think I was just saying that in addition to what you were saying, Neresia, with regards to unpicking a little bit so that we can look at other ways of, like, is it I don't know if I'd say decontextualizing, but maybe I would, so that, like, the language that we use or the concepts that we use are challenged by similar concepts or other ways of explaining things as well. Because it will be in theory, but also in practice, it will definitely feed in and help, because it may just open up an understanding of how a client shows up, like you're saying, who they're bringing into the room, how they locate themselves in a space as well. If I feed into what you were saying, Chris, because I'm half Sutu, and like how we greet is dumelang, reteng ligai. Ligai means guy means where are you? Ligai. And then if I say reteng, I'm saying I am here with you. So it's like there's a way that we communicate and meet ourselves in that way, in that language. So if I start to understand that's how we kind of greet and see ourselves, that can help as well. Yeah, sorry,
Sure,
go for it.
sure. Yeah, no, to just say exactly the same in Igbo. If
Mm,
in Igbo you ask, the first thing you see something, you say, "Have you seen the morning?"
mm,
Mm,
And he said, "Yes, I've seen the morning,"
mm,
which has brings a whole concept of the start of the day and what's coming forward and going to unfold of his whole day. So it's not how are you? You can make sure. Have you seen the morning? Yeah, I've seen the morning and all that is following. Well, there's no way of saying that in English.
mm,
exactly.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also have just seen that Natalie's put a comment in, and she says, I think a shift, if we centered the theme of injustice, might be we would realize that it is important to look much further back and much more explicitly at the history of our existence as humans to understand deeply the way injustice has shaped the evolution and the extermination of members and groups of species over time. And that makes me add a thought that bridging disciplines such as anthropology and history would be incredibly important. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if you want to say more on that, Natalie. Not to throw you
I
or
was,
anybody. Yeah, okay,
yeah,
good.
I was getting completely fascinated by this idea of even just how we greet ourselves, and so I'm sad to have sidetracked away from that. I think language is just so powerful, so incredible, such a huge part of our existence. But yeah, I don't know that there was be so much to add. I guess on Thanksgiving is probably what which is when we're recording this, which is what partly what stimulated that thought, because when there are so many people who have said, I'm sorry, I can't be here, it's Thanksgiving, or I might come in and out because it's Thanksgiving, and I was thinking, in the UK we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. What's the history of Thanksgiving? And you look into the history of Thanksgiving, and there's a story that some are told, and there's a story that others, for some it's a day of celebration, for some it's a day of mourning. And I think it's something that I am really fascinated about when we think, if we're looking at that theme of injustice and we're looking at what coming together to explore existence, if we really, really centered the theme of injustice when exploring existence, our history, just to be alive, even from pre-human species, is absolutely incredible. The injustice that has been faced, and the fact that it's such a miracle in many ways. It's such a complicated layers and layers of almost miraculous that any of us exist today to be able to be here together. And that's something that really is really present for me. But that was my
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes. I really would love for anybody that has, any like thoughts to share. and hasn't yet spoken, you can put it in the chat. It can be a word, a phrase.
Well, I wanted to say I'm really grateful for everyone turning up and for everyone, you know, who felt the courage and the safety to participate. And if, you know, when we continue on this platform, I implore everyone to do the same, because it is good and meaningful and really necessary that we engage in the conversation. And I want this to be a safe space. Natalie, we will be doing something about whatever's going on with the link to make it as safe as possible, so we don't have unnecessary, unrelatable intrusions of any kind, so that we can equally participate if we choose to in a more meaningful way, because we are really encouraged, you know, for everything everyone shared and for you just even turning up today.
Yeah, just to second what you've said again, whether you've said something or you've just sat and been with us, it's been equally meaningful. And thank you for everything that has been shared. It's always a pleasure, and it really charges me up and keeps me going in the in-between. So thank you everybody for taking out this time, because time is precious. So yeah, really appreciate your presence and thoughts. So I think we'll hand back to Natalie. Thank you, Shazza.
Yeah, thank you both so much, and thank you all so much, as you both have just said, whether that was sitting here today and joining the conversation in any way, sharing your feedback in any way, or just being present. It all matters. However we're engaging with this way of thinking and expanding our thinking, whether the way that we're engaging with this dialogue, it all matters, and it's all appreciated by, you know, people like ourselves who feel passionate about continuing this conversation. I hope that this won't be the final time that we all meet together. I think in whatever way we're finding our voice, it's meaningful to have hopefully a safe space, even when there is discomfort and big emotion in that space, to come together. And so yeah, I hope that this won't be the last time that we all find each other in this space, but it probably will be before the winter break. And so for everybody who is celebrating different holidays over the next few months, I hope that you take really good care of yourselves, and especially for those working in jobs and ways of life that are demanding a lot from you. I think I also wanted to say, remember that engaging in life meaningfully can be extremely moving, but extremely exhausting as well. And so please don't feel like you're betraying your passion if you are taking some time for yourself as well. It's really important to step away and to be kind and to be gentle, and to re-energize yourself, to be able to step back in and find that strength to do whatever is meaningful to you. So that's my little thought about self-care over the next few weeks, months. We don't quite know, until hopefully all of us meet again, and we do have in mind what we might be reconnecting with in the new year, but I'll leave that as a bit of a mystery for now. So once again, a massive thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you so much to Neresia and Sheba for doing this, for continuing this conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.